I'm convening the regular meeting of the Sonoma Planning Commission to order, and please start a roll call.
Commissioner DAMBACH?
Here.
Commissioner O'Gorman-Jenkins?
Here.
Commissioner Nugent?
Here.
Commissioner Willers?
Here.
Vice Chair BARBOSE?
Here.
Chair BARNETT?
Here.
And I would like to note too that Commissioner O'Neill is going to be just a few minutes late.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Are there any recommendations for a change to the sequence or items on the agenda? Without any, do we need a motion for that?
Yeah, we need a motion and a second and a vote.
Okay, I'd like a motion for the approval of the agenda, please.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Call that a tie. All right, roll call, please.
Commissioner DAMBACH?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Gorman-Jenkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent?
Aye.
Commissioner Willers?
Yes.
Vice Chair BARBOSE?
Yes.
And Chair BARNETT?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
All,
Pirates lose.
all right, next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If we would all stand up, please. Next up is correspondence. Do we have any correspondence to report?
There was no late correspondence received.
Okay, we do, and I note we did get correspondence that's in our document center, which I'm assuming everyone has had access to. All right, the next item is the consent calendar, or excuse me, comments from the public on items not on the agenda. Sir, do you have anything that is comment? Okay. Well, seeing none, we will move on to the next item. We have nothing on the consent calendar. So the first item on a regular calendar is a public hearing. 5.1, consideration, discussion, and possible action to adopt a resolution approving a wine tasting use permit at 27 East Napa Street. And I assume we have a staff report.
Here we go. Thank you all. Happy Thursday. The wine tasting use permit for 27 East Napa Street, Suite E. As we've all experienced a few times, the wine tasting use permit provisions are located in Sonoma Municipal Code Chapter 1950-120. The applicant is proposing to put a new tasting room where there was already one. There's no physical improvements that are needed, but the space has been vacant for more than the 60 days to grandfather in the legal non-conforming use, so they're requesting a new use permit at this time. The special use standards are contained in 1950-120. One of the limitations in that section is that there are no more than 25 wine tasting facilities in the Plaza Retail Overlay Zone. There's currently 23, so this, should it be approved this evening, would be number 24. We have the attached conditions of approval. These are largely the standard conditions of approval that are included in the Sonoma Municipal Code, with the exception that the applicant has requested a 10 a.m. start time instead of 11 a.m. The applicant would meet the on-site parking provisions with the Sonoma Court Shop parking spaces. The requirement is 1 space per 300 square feet, and 2 spaces would be required. This is located kind of in the back of the Sonoma Court Shops. And we have the wine tasting use permit findings of approval. The recommendation is to approve the wine tasting use permit subject to findings and conditions of approval.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for staff? No? From people online there, Matthew?
There are currently no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay. And I assume this gentleman in the audience is not here for this item? Okay, thank you, sir. All right, then we'll bring it back to the commission for consideration and discussion. Who'd like to start? Who has anything to say? Who'd like to make a motion?
I motion to approve.
And do we have a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner DAMBACH,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Gorman Jenkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barbose,
Yes.
and Chair Barnett.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
The next item is item 5.2. Discussion, consideration, and possible action to approve a use permit and design review application for the exterior modifications at the El Dorado Hotel and Kitchen at 405 First Street West. Christina?
We're all very familiar with this site, so I won't go into the details. There's no construction proposed. It is located in the downtown district in the historic overlay. The subject property is a historic structure. So the three permits are a use permit amendment, design review, and a sign permit. The use permit is to authorize the continued use of the Cantina to Go service window that was established on West Main Street during the COVID pandemic. The emergency order ended in February, and in order to legalize that, a use permit is required. The requested hours of operation are from noon to 8 p.m. Staff is recommending additional hours to allow flexibility in the future. The design review is required for the proposed exterior modifications to the existing commercial building. This includes modifications to the windows and doors as well as exterior paint. All of the proposals are really going to match the existing building. There was an application for design review in 2021, and this is a slight modification from what was approved at that time. And the paint, just to clarify, so the paint colors that are at the Cantina to Go window would be replaced and they would match the existing building. Here's the proposed color palette. The signage is really to help members of the public to identify the different functions of the building, the hotel, the restaurant, and the to-go window. So there will be existing signs that are being replaced and a couple signs that will be removed, but overall it's to establish separate entries for the hotel and the restaurant, and then to clearly identify the to-go window. So the proposed signage for the hotel includes a new wall sign above the main entry, as well as a new hanging sign. The new wall sign would replace the existing wall sign at the same location and would include El Dorado Hotel in metal lettering and would be installed on the existing fascia board that would be painted white. The lettering would be 1 foot tall and approximately 17.5 feet wide. The existing hanging sign at the main entry doors would be removed, and a new hanging sign would direct guests from the sidewalk. And the sign would be a gray square with gold accents and would measure 2 feet 8 inches on all sides with El Dorado Hotel in white lettering. There's an existing wall-mounted sign on at the front entry that would be removed. For the restaurant, there are 2 proposed wall signs, wall sign 1 and 2, that would direct guests to the restaurant entry from the street view and from the sidewalk. Wall sign 2 would have the letters El Dorado Kitchen in gray lettering installed on the fascia board similar to the hotel sign. And wall 3 would be similar to one of the other hotel sign, which would be 2 feet 8 inches. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. Pardon me. 8.5 inches tall and 6 feet 10 inches wide with a small gold lettering and the word kitchen. The to-go window signage would include the new hanging sign and would be a gray square with gold accents, 2 feet 8 inches on all sides with El Dorado Cantina in white lettering. Here are the elevations of the signs. As I mentioned earlier, the building is a historic structure within the Plaza Register, but it is a non-contributing building. And the only, which is really to the building, it's going to be new signage and paint. The required findings of approval are for a use permit, design review, and sign permit. Staff's recommendation is to approve the use permit, design review, and sign permit, subject to findings and conditions of approval.
Thank you, Christina. Any questions?
Yes, a few slides back, I think there was a sample of the sign. Is that what they're going to look like, this gray with the gold? Okay. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Willers?
Christina, has staff coordinated this with the sign ordinance in terms of the size of the signs and
Yes.
the lettering? Okay.
Further? Okay, any members of the public here to speak on this item? Please give your name and, for the record, and your address.
Hello, my name is Chris Dorman. I'm with Dorman Associates. We're the architect for this project, and I hopefully didn't hit something that turned off. Okay, good. And I think that was a very thorough summary, so I don't know that I have anything to add, but I am here to answer any questions.
Any questions for this gentleman? Seeing none, it's pretty straightforward, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any discussion, anybody online?
There are currently no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay. And let's move to the discussion or motions.
Just one comment. I'm glad to see the cantina to go back.
Any other comments or discussion? I'll just say that I'm looking forward to the building colors for this sidewalk service to end up conforming with the rest of the colors of the building. I think it may have served its purpose during the pandemic when that sort of service wasn't customary, but now that it's been there for a while, I'm glad to see it being enfolded into the look of the rest of the building. Okay, any motions? Mr. Willers?
I'll make a motion to approve use permit and design review application UA 2311 and sign permit S 23-2.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, congratulations, you made it this time. All right. Matthew?
Commissioner Dom,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Gorman Jenkins,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill,
I think I shall abstain since I just walked in.
thank you, Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barbos,
Aye.
and Chair Barnett.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Right, I've got a question about our timing and sequence. We started the meeting at 5 o'clock in order to make sure that we had plenty of time for the last item on the agenda, which we had sort of scheduled for 6, and the item is listed with a time certain on the agenda. I believe that means we need to adjourn for the meantime, take a recess, and then reconvene at 6 p.m.
That's correct. For this one, we're fine. Yes, that's correct. You'll adjourn and then recess, and then we'll come back right before 6 o'clock and start it again.
Okay, so we'll now take an adjournment until 6 o'clock.
Thank you.
going to reconvene the regular session of Sonoma Planning Commission to move on to the last item on the agenda, 6.1. Before we begin that agenda, I'd like to make a statement. I'm going to be recusing myself from this item. While I feel I could and would be able to do a professional and impartial and objective analysis of this project, the other reality is that my history with this project is, shall we say, complicated. And I don't want those complications to distract the community or distract this commission from its work. This is an important and major project for our small town. It needs to be able to have the kind of attention that it deserves. We've got a wonderful planning commission up here of smart, thoughtful people who I'm sure will bring all their skills to the topic. And so with an effort to make sure that there's the best outcome for everyone involved in this, I'm going to recuse myself, and from this point forward, when this item or items pertaining to the hotel come to the agenda, I will also be recusing myself from those and any further items pertaining to this project that come up in the future. I'll now give the gavel to the Vice Chair, former Mayor Steve Barbose, and he will take you and the Commission through the process tonight. And with that, I'll let him also adjourn the meeting, and I'm going to go home.
See you later.
Okay.
It's different than my chair. I know. Okay. Is staff ready to proceed? Please do.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Gates. I am the new Community Development Director. For some of you, I am a new face. And so I just wanted to introduce myself first, and I look forward to meeting you all in this great city. And I look forward to maybe even seeing you at the grocery store, since I do live in town. With that, tonight's item for discussion is a public meeting to receive comments on the recirculated draft environmental impact report for Hotel Sonoma Project, which is located at 153 West Napa Street and 541 First Street West. And this is to an EIR to evaluate the redevelopment of an existing site, and we'll get into the details here shortly of the background of the project and the site itself. I just wanted to remind everybody in the room tonight that we are only here to really receive comments on this recirculated draft environmental impact report, as well as any questions that may be had. And then those questions and comments will be responded to through this CEQA process and in the future environmental impact report. That final version will have those responses to comments. So we do have a structure to tonight's public meeting. This isn't a public hearing. There is no action or decision being made or direction being received tonight from the Planning Commission. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to Christina, who will be presenting the first half, and she will introduce our consultant who prepared the draft EAR.
Thank you, Jennifer, and warm welcome to the city. We're very excited to have you. Over to my right is Matt Gherkin with AECOM, who is our consultant and has been since about 2018. So Matt's been on the project for a really long time and very happy to have him on the project team. So the agenda for this evening is to go over a little bit about the project background, the meeting purpose, and Matt will go over the CEQA process, an overview of the proposed project, and a summary of the environmental impact report. We will then follow with public comments and go over, how to comment on the EIR and next steps. As many of you know, the project has been going on for quite a while. The original application was submitted in June of 2012. The first round of environmental review was kicked off in 2015. There was a notice of preparation, a public scoping meeting, and the draft EIR was circulated for public comment from January 26, 2016 to March 10th, 2016. In February, there was a public meeting to receive comments on the draft EIR, similar to what's going to happen this evening. The Planning Commission certified the final EIR on April 13th of 2017, but no action was taken on the entitlements. An appeal was filed on the EIR certification, and City Council heard the appeal and directed revisions to the EIR and the preparation of a recirculated EIR in August of 2017. In 2018, the city prepared a recirculated EIR that was termed at the time a revised draft EIR. It was, for the purposes of CEQA, a recirculated EIR as well. The 45-day comment period was from July 20th, 2018 to September 13th, 2018. On September 4th of 2018, there was a public comment meeting on the revised draft EIR, and following that, a revised final EIR was prepared. Following preparation of the EIR, the city determined that another round of review was required to address potential impacts that needed to be mitigated that weren't analyzed in the draft EIR that was circulated to the public. And that's where we've been since that time, is working on that next round. So a notice of preparation was issued on August 3rd, 2021. It was not required because there was a prior one, but it's a good faith effort to inform the public and agencies as much as possible. It gets everything started in the state system, and we just wanted to use this draft EIR and go back to the beginning, and instead of trying to kind of piecemeal the review, the current review before everyone this evening, this is a brand new comprehensive EIR, so it doesn't include any of the other versions or drafts. Any comments on prior versions will not be included in this next draft. So we're starting from square one. This is the new draft EIR. We held a scoping meeting on August 12th, 2021, and we're currently within the public comment period that extends from June 23rd and ends August 7th. And so just to clarify for the audience, we are accepting public comments until August 7th, and any comments that were submitted previously are not going to be responded to in the final EIR for this document. So we're going to do a little planning 101. Sometimes there's a lot of confusion between what is a planning issue and what is the CEQA process. They're two separate but overlapping processes with different legal requirements and different but related topics that can be a little bit confusing. So CEQA is an environmental review process that is required by state law. It is required to be completed prior to action on the project and evaluates physical environmental impacts resulting from the proposed project. CEQA is really looking at the change in baseline. So what is there today and what is the impact that the project will cause on the environment? Topics include air quality, greenhouse gas and energy, biology, aesthetics, cultural resources, hazards, hydrology, water quality, geology. There's a list that is required by CEQA. It is adopted by state law. And CEQA includes an evaluation of project alternatives that are designed to reduce environmental impacts. The planning process is the processing of discretionary applications such as design review, permits, use permits, variances, exceptions, and they are approvable by staff. Some are administrative. Some of our permits are approved by the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission, and some by the Planning Commission. Project approvals of a discretionary approval must consider CEQA prior to taking action on a project. Topics that are planning topics and issues that are not covered by CEQA include parking, traffic congestion, project design, and other considerations like that. It does include the evaluation of project merits, where the CEQA process does not. Planning processes will often include conditions of approval and modifications to the project through those entitlement processes. So this evening we are here to discuss and present the recirculated draft EIR, accept public comments, and the comments should be limited to comments on the environmental impacts addressed in the recirculated draft EIR. So comments should be related to the topics in CEQA, and they can be questions, they can be comments, suggestions on that document. Projects on project merits should be reserved for a later date when the hearings for the applications will happen once the final EIR has been prepared for consideration by the Planning Commission. So after this evening, we will wait for the end of the public comment period to close, and all of the comments will be sent to the consultant, and AECOM's team will go through all of the comments and prepare responses to comments and make amendments to the EIR as needed. And that final document will be presented along with the project to the Planning Commission. So, and to reiterate what Jennifer said, there are no decisions or actions being made tonight. This is solely an opportunity to receive comments on the EIR. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Christina. Stand-in chair, vice chair, BARBOSE, members of the Planning Commission, thanks for taking a little time to hear about this important project. Just like there's a little overlap between planning and CEQA, I suspect there'll be a little overlap between my little presentation and the thorough one that you just received from Christina, but I'll try to limit that duplication as much as I can. As Christina mentioned, CEQA is really not about the merits of a project, whether it should be approved or not. CEQA is about disclosing adverse physical environmental effects to inform that decision-making process, to adopt feasible mitigation when there are potential significant effects, and to look at a reasonable range of alternatives that could reduce environmental effects of a project. Next, please. The EIR, Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, that is the subject of the discussion tonight, does just that. It discloses all potential adverse physical environmental effects that are directly related to this project or are reasonably foreseeably indirectly related to the implementation of this project, with focus on potentially significant adverse effects. We include feasible mitigation to address potentially significant environmental impacts. There's a broad range of potentially feasible alternatives in the back of the EIR, and also we're setting up the framework for mitigation monitoring and enforcement of mitigation on the project itself if it is to be approved in the future and constructed. Little on the CEQA process. Christina actually covered all of this already, but with the restart we find ourselves in now, we're at the yellow highlighted spot with a notice of preparation informing the scope of analysis, all that information, advertising to the world. We're about to prepare an EIR. What do you think we should look at? That's been incorporated into the recirculated draft EIR. Comment period you see on this slide till August 7th. Next step is final EIR responses to comments, revisions if we need them, and then along with that, setting up for decision making on the project itself, findings, CEQA findings, statement of overriding considerations, if there are significant unavoidable effects. It's permissible within CEQA to adopt a project, of course, even if it has significant unavoidable effects. You just need to explain to the public and the world what the overriding economic reasons are for approving that project anyway, social reasons, other reasons for going ahead with a project despite significant effects, and mitigation monitoring. And then with that, action on the project. A little about the project. In your packet you'll notice it's a 62-room hotel with a restaurant and bar and swimming pool and spa, 8 residential units in the proposed project, 130 on-site parking spaces, the required water and wastewater and drainage improvements to serve this new project, and at the outset it will involve demolition of some buildings that are on the site currently. This slide shows in yellow outline the project site Right now, the project site's about, I'm told, about 1.5 acres. But with the lot line adjustment that's included as a part of the approvals for this project, the ultimate project site will be about 1.25 acres. It's developed. It has 4 buildings on it. It has a parking lot on the site right now. Zoning is for commercial. There's a historic overlay. It's in the downtown district. It's surrounded on all sides by developed property. Here's another shot of, this time in orange, of the project site right off the plaza there. And you'll notice that the EIR is filled with visual simulations that show what the look of the project would be from different vantage points, and here are a couple of examples of that. And then a little close-up of the site, the existing buildings on the site. And this slide is the first, the ground floor plan, I believe, showing to the bottom right where the residential building would be, Courtyard Plaza off of Napa, and the main hotel building off of Napa as well. The Lynch building stays as part of the project. You'll notice some, I'm sure you've, with bated breath, read a lot of EIRs before, and some of them are great reading, and some of them are brief, and some are comprehensive, and some are way too comprehensive. We're trying to strike a balance here. But you will notice that everything that we can quantify, we've quantified. We've tried to provide a lot of detail on the analysis of this project because it's important. You know, we knew there would be a high level of interest. You'll see a lot of alternatives, a lot of different alternatives, for example, in that chapter of the document, because we figured we wanted to maximize the amount of relevant information for you as decision makers on this project. So apologize for the length of the document, but we hope it is still readable, and we believe it does provide valuable and relevant information that will inform your decision ultimately on this project. Let's see, a little quick summary of the, I think the body of the EIR is 408 pages, and the appendices are another 2,500 pages or something like that. But it will only take me a few minutes to summarize it, trust me, okay? First, starting with significant unavoidable effects. There are 3 to greenhouse relative to greenhouse gas emissions, construction, temporary construction, noise effects, and vehicular travel demand, transportation effects of the project. The project also has a few impacts that were potentially significant, but where we are imposing mitigation that reduces those impacts to less than significant in the topics that are on the slide before you now: air quality and archaeology, tribal cultural resources and paleontological resources, soil and groundwater effects related to the historic use of the property, construction-related vibration, operational noise, and wastewater conveyance capacity. All of those impact areas are addressed by mitigation in the EIR. And then we have a smattering of effects, which I won't read, that are on this slide, that without mitigation are less than significant due to the location of the project, the scale of the project, or other features.
Just a couple additional items to note. Just want to clarify for everyone, this is the city's document. This is not the applicant's document. This was prepared by independent third parties, and wherever possible or wherever it came up, we erred on the side of being conservative. So there's a lot of base assumptions in the EIR where you have choices, and wherever we could, we elected to be conservative. An example for the VMT, we assumed that there's no activities on the site right now. And just throughout every single section, our goal was to be conservative as possible to inform the public what a worst case scenario could be. So I'm just going to take a moment to go over the alternatives analysis. This was really one of the primary reasons the recirculated EIR was prepared in the first place. And alternatives are required by the CEQA guidelines, and the requirements and criteria are that an alternative is able to attain the most basic project objectives. They are feasible, and that they're able to avoid or substantially reduce one or more significant effects of the proposed project. So alternatives are not just ideas that we thought of that, oh, hey, this would be a really great project. They have to be something really specific. And so the project objectives are laid out in the beginning of the EIR. I'm not going to read all of them. There's quite a few, but developing a hotel at an economic scale, stimulating the economy, providing aesthetic architecture, sustainable design, providing job opportunities, minimizing vehicle trips to ensure safe and convenient access to the town of Sonoma. So we go through the project objectives and then we look at what environmental impacts have been identified in the EIR. So the development of the alternatives comes actually after the meat of the EIR has been written. So we look at what the impacts are, and the alternatives are designed to reduce these impacts. So in particular for this project, the key impacts are for greenhouse gas emissions. Construction noise is really going to result from any kind of project, and then vehicle miles traveled. And then those that were less than significant impacts with mitigation listed below, those were also considered, but the significant unavoidable impacts are the ones where we were really trying to reduce those impacts through the development of the alternatives. And so we are required under CEQA to consider a reasonable range of alternatives. It does not hold the Planning Commission's hands down the line when there's project approval. Those are two separate ideas about what's going to eventually be approved and what are the alternatives that are considered in the EIR. So the range of alternatives that were evaluated in the EIR include the CEQA required no project alternative. That assumes that there's nothing built at the site. The first alternative, alternative 2, this is really coming from our code requirement for a residential component, and that is for a 50-50 commercial residential requirement. So that was designed by looking at the area of the site, the maximum density of 20 units per acre, and working with the project goals to come up with a scenario under which we would have a 50% commercial, 50% residential alternative. We didn't want to just give you one of those options, so we kind of split the difference and also have a 75-25 alternative, as well as a hotel-only alternative. And there is also an alternative where the general size of the hotel is the same, but the number of rooms has been reduced. They're more expanded suites, and that addresses vehicle miles traveled because there would be fewer people coming and going. With that one, there's no residential component, but there is still the restaurant and the pool. In addition to the alternatives that were considered in the EIR is an alternative that was considered but rejected from further consideration, and that is off-site alternatives. And the reason for that being considered and rejected is primarily the lack of available sites in the downtown area that could meet the project goals, and also developing the same project in another location within our 2.74 square mile city wouldn't really have any reduction in environmental impacts. It's the same construction, the same traffic, just in a different location in our tiny city. And so I will move it on to Matt. I'll let you describe the table.
Thank you. So for the 5 different alternatives that Christina just enumerated, we examine all the environmental effects that you see on the left part of the slide, and we make a determination as to whether the alternatives impacts in that area would be greater, would be reduced, or would be about the same. That's the summary that you see. As you might guess, doing nothing to change what's on the site today is the environmentally superior alternative. That's alternative 1. Reduces impacts in 12 different areas. And through the detailed analysis that you see in the alternatives chapter of the EIR, the next most environmentally superior alternative would be that 75-25 alternative 3 hotel residential alternative that Christina just described to you. But it's very similar to alternative 5, which reduces impacts in 8 different areas. Are we ready for next steps, or do we want to absorb this slide a little more? Okay, next steps. We kind of already got into this a little bit, but we'll receive written comments. CEQA really favors written comments. It involves less interpretation of what somebody meant if people put comments in writing, and then we can provide responses to each comment that pertains to pertains to a potential adverse environmental effect associated with the project. That will be a part of the final EIR, as will any necessary revisions to the draft EIR text. And as I mentioned, these other documents that go along with certification of the environmental process and the final EIR, and then considering action on the project. And finally, we'll maybe hang on this slide so that those who are paying attention can make note of where to send comments on the adequacy of this draft EIR. The draft EIR is available, as you see, at the planning counter Monday through Friday. It's also available on the website that you see the URL of at the top of this slide, and comments go to Christina using the contact information that is listed on this slide by 5 p.m. on August 7th. Thank you again for entertaining this short presentation, and I'll turn it back over to the Vice Chair, I suppose, with direction from Christina.
Yeah, I'll just make one more comment. We often get questions about comment responses, and so Matt alluded to the fact that comments on the EIR will be responded to, comments on project merits will be noted, but those should be reserved for the hearings on the permits.
A point of clarification, what if someone has a question, will that be responded to later as well?
It's not a good idea. I'm sorry. I'll just, based on my experience, my beard is gray enough to have some. It is tricky territory to respond to comments about the adequacy of the EIR live time. I might not remember a number correctly. I might not have total recall of everything that is in the environmental document, so it's a little risky. Comments about the process, you know, that's fair game. That's the process. But I'm not going to respond to comments that would have me digging through the document in order to provide a response.
Sure.
If there are any questions that we can respond, we will respond tonight. However, if there are questions that are more about the EIR, as he stated, then those would be part of our response to comments later on.
Okay.
And in the documents, I mean, we prefer, if there are certain questions like where is that, things like that, or comments that are kind of questions, again, those would be responded in a written format with that final document. It helps everybody, I think, also remember what was said and how it was responded to.
Okay, looking at the agenda, or the report on this item on the agenda, looks like we are going to solicit comments and questions from the commissioners at this point. So are any of my fellow commissioners of a mind to raise some questions or comments at this point? Ms. Dambach?
I have several.
Go ahead.
All right. The nature of my comments are based upon Table 1.1. I tried to associate the comments and questions with that table and reference other parts of the document where other sections that refer to the same question. Hopefully this will go fairly quickly. So my first question is with regard to, and comment is with regard to, on that Table 1-1, 4.7-1, the GHG emissions generation, and its mitigation measure 4.7-1A. Also referencing section 3.1.3, supporting infrastructure, other utilities. So my question revolves around the installation, whether solar panels are also going to be installed on the residential component. It's not clear from the EIR. And the comment is that installation of solar panels on the residential component would help mitigate greenhouse gases. Okay. The next is also with regard to 4.7-1 greenhouse gas emissions certification. And this is with regard to implementation, pardon me, let me just move this. Sorry, can't see this. 4.7-1B, implementation measure for transportation demand management for project guests and employees on page 26. So what I noticed is that both in that section and later in the document where details are given, there is no response. And I'm wondering if this should be referring to 4.13-2A and not 4.14-A. So there seems to be a disconnect within the document. And this, the other section is on background. It's 14.3-2A, pages 192 to 194. Again, there's no comment there, so I'm not sure if there's a disconnect in the reference. Moving on, same table, 4.13-1 transportation. So when I read Appendix G, which was the transportation impact study, there was a section on evaluation of collisions, automobile collisions at the intersection of West Napa and First Street West. But what I did not see was an analysis of pedestrian automobile accidents related to the safety. So the comment is, can we please include that in that and do that assessment? The second question relates to a recommendation made in that same Appendix G document. The recommendation was that there should be some improvements or enhancements to that intersection. The recommendation was that the applicant provide funding for at least 50%. And I did not see that as part of the mitigation in the table. You guys okay with me moving on? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I'm moving on to 4.13-1 transportation, and this is the impact for 0.13-2A. And basically it says that, as we know, because you pointed it out, the VMT generated would be very significant and unavoidable. So my first comment under the visitor-focused VMT mitigation measure, there is a mitigation to provide rental car and transportation information. And my comment is, please include additional information about the availability of EV charging stations at the hotel as in the informational material to encourage the use of electric vehicles. Now, with regard to the cumulatively considerable and significant and unavoidable on page 193, I have several questions and comments to consider. So question number one is under, again, the employee-focused VMT mitigation measures. The question is whether those measures are monitorable and enforceable by the city. So there are several measures that are being put forward: ride shares, mass transit subsidies, carpooling subsidies or payments, and bicycling subsidies. And the comment is, if these are not monitorable and enforceable, then it's reasonable to assume the likelihood of implementation and sustainability would be low. With regard to the to mass transit in particular, again, in Appendix G, the Transportation Impact Study, Table 4, that data does not support the conclusion, in my mind, that was made that the mass transit is adequate. In particular, there's only one bus, the 30X, that leaves at 7:45 p.m. and another bus, the 34X, there's only one bus in each direction, one at 6:45 a.m. and one at 3:50 p.m. And it seems like that is inadequate for feasible practicality to move employees. The question is whether it's feasible or legal to ask the applicant to help provide funding for mass transit, similar to what we do with water infrastructure. Moving on to the other incentives around commuting and car sharing and bicycling. These are at most 8% of a reduction. It's very minimal, and there are conclusions in the EIR that says that these are adequate. I don't have the exact language. That seems unreasonable or not supported by the data, I should say. And in data-based, in many places, but I got mine from Data USA, only 6% of workers in Sonoma carpool. And 92% of visitors to Sonoma drive cars, either their own or rental cars. The other important data is that the average commute for Sonoma workers is at least 30 minutes. That puts us in Petaluma, Novato, Vallejo, South Santa Rosa, and Napa. And so the likelihood of being able to have a dispersed population to be able to carpool is probably low. And finally, with regard to bicycling, given that average commute time, which is probably almost 30 miles, the feasibility of someone bicycling to work is probably pretty low. So the comment here is that the most impactful thing that we could do is to please consider requiring as much affordable workforce or missing middle housing as possible. We saw that in the alternatives where even though there are 5 alternatives, actually alternative 2 reduces the VMT by 45%, alternative 5 by 30%. So I know there was a table that said that it was reduced, but it wasn't weighted. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's an important comment. I'm almost done. The next is, again, in transportation. It's 4.13-3A. And this regards the traffic queuing and blocking, especially West Napa. This also refers to Section 3.1, proposed project characteristics, on-site land uses for deliveries and loading. So I have a couple of comments here. Again, going back to Appendix G, the Transportation Impact Study, they discuss PM and AM peak travel periods, yet in that appendix, there's no definition for AM peaks. There's no time, it's not even mentioned. So the comment would be that this should be included and analyzed appropriately. The other comments really, the other comment around this is that in that study, even though it focuses on intersections, there is a statement that says the driveway connection should, however, be evaluated for operational issues, such as adequacy of site, need for turn lanes, and delay that may be relevant. And so regarding that, the questions and comments would be that in the exiting from the hotel courtyard, there should be signage that says it's a right turn only so that people are not trying to make a left turn onto West Napa. The next question, it says specifically, is that full-size buses cannot enter or drop off at the hotel courtyard. So that's not even discussed in the transportation impact. And it needs to be discussed because where will these people be dropped off? It's very likely that there will be people staying at this hotel that are coming en masse as a group. And yet there's no discussion about the impact of having where that bus will drop off passengers. And regarding the loading and unloading, there is an inadequacy in the Appendix G Transportation Impact Study. The study was assessed assuming there would be a loading dock off of First Street West, and that is not in the current plan. The current plan has a temporary loading dock for large tractor trailers in particular. It has a temporary loading dock that is in the courtyard. And yet there's no assessment of whether a semi-sized truck can even feasibly turn into the courtyard or back up into West Napa, which would cause queuing and delays. And so the comment would be that that needs to go back and be assessed of how would a large tractor trailer sized truck go into the courtyard and come out of the courtyard, and what would be the impact on traffic. finally, regarding that, temporary loading zone for the large trucks, on the plans, that loading area is right in front of the 7 shared parking spaces for the Lynch building. And it is described that the assumption is that the truck will come in the early morning, but if there are residents who are parked there, how will they get out if there's a truck? So having a description of the impact and detailed plan to ensure that the Lynch building residents are not blocked from their normal egress during the AM hours would be requested. Okay. And now moving on to, this is section 3.1, proposed project characteristics, 3.1.1, on-site land uses. And this is in regard to the 8-unit residential building. One of the alternatives that I didn't see, which would help reduce VMT, is to have that 3-story be all unit and have the parking be underground. So that would add conceivably 4 more units, bringing the number of units up to 12. So the comment would be to consider that as an alternative as well. Now, whether that's done in this EIR, does impact VMT, or at the planning project, that decision can be made. Okay. A moment, I think. And just the final comment regarding that. In the EIR, I know we're not talking about parking, but with regard to this proposal to move the parking, that parking could be part of a shared parking agreement similar to one proposed for the 136, 144 West Napa for the 9 spaces that would be used for employees. So I think there's a precedent, and the consideration would be to use that precedent to provide 12 dedicated spaces in the underground parking for those residents. And finally, cumulative impact section, table 6-1, list of cumulative projects. The question is really around why is the SDC hotel housing and the Hannah Center not also considered? And the rationale is that in a situation of an acute emergency where a phased evacuation is not possible, similar to what happened in 2017, it's an acute emergency. There are only 2 major thoroughfares in Sonoma Valley, Highway 12 and Arnold Drive. And the cumulative effect of having to move all of those people, I would ask to be considered as well in this, even though this might be a 62 room hotel, there's a larger cumulative effect of a lot of new housing and new hotels that only have 2 roads to get us to major routes for evacuation. So I'm done now. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Mr.
One
Willis?
clarification. So I would prefer to hear the public comment before I make my comments, or ask my questions and make comments. Is that not the order that we're going in?
Well, I was just
Can I
following
reserve
what
my
was
time to
in
do
the staff report. This was the sequence. Why don't we say that I'll come back to you later if you have additional comments.
that? Okay. I'm going to listen to other commissioners.
Okay. Nope. Everybody's waiting. Okay, well, I thought that was a pretty extensive and list of things that Commissioner DAMBACH discussed. I, too, have concerns about the loading dock and the entry and how the trucks are going to get in and out of the courtyard. And along with that, the left turn lane issue that's addressed in the delivery plan in the appendix seems unclear to me how why a left turn lane. I understand it's a lot more expensive than not having it, but why that isn't something that is being promoted as a safety measure. What I'm envisioning is just the amount of additional people that are going to be crossing the street, pedestrians, the interface between pedestrian and vehicular traffic, I'm sort of jumping around, but these two things are related in my mind, isn't addressed. We're going to have a lot more people wandering around the plaza and crossing what is the busiest, if not the second busiest, crosswalk in the city, and that's First Street West at Napa Street, or going across. And I think that if you envision a lot of people walking across there, as they will be, traffic is going to get backed up, and then when that opens up, people are going to come jamming through that intersection. And if you've got somebody sitting and blocking the road, waiting to make a left turn because there's no left turn lane, you've created a traffic hazard. So I would like to see that more extensively analyzed. Simply saying it doesn't meet some, I realize this was Trans work and not yours, but nonetheless, the warrant analysis seems pretty conclusory, and there's, unless you're deep in travel study, chart reading, it was not intelligible to me. So I would like some narrative about that and why it is that it's not deemed necessary to put in a left turn lane. One person even went so far as to say to me that that you can't legally make a left turn across a double yellow line there. I looked at the vehicle code quickly, and it seems that you can, but I think that ought to be looked at again. The other, going back to loading, I'm a little confused by this. Commissioner DAMBACH indicated that the First Street West loading idea was apparently being dropped, but that's not my reading of this. Is that it's still contemplated in that it says that the big rig truck is going to be using First Street. So I'm imagining an 18-wheeler trying to get into First Street West, and I think there should be some more analysis to how the heck it's even going to get in there. You've got bollards restricting that intersection as it is, and if you tried to turn an 18-wheeler truck into that intersection, you would just completely take out all those bollards and have a difficult time missing any parked cars. So I think that really needs to be revisited if that is in fact part of this proposal. If not, and it's just the courtyard, then I join in the concerns about how is a big rig truck going to get in and out of that courtyard. And those really exhaust my comments that weren't already covered. But does anybody else want to add anything at this point, or I'll go out to the public?
I have, go ahead, Bill. A comment about the courtyard turnaround. It's to accommodate a fire truck, obviously, which is a very large vehicle, I guess as big as an 18-wheeler perhaps. What's the rationale to not let the buses, which are, I think, smaller, why are they not allowed in the turnaround? And off topic, the residential units, are they leased, and are they leased at market rate? And is that satisfying something in the application to have those? And yeah, that's my question.
That's, I think a lot of people will have that, so I'll jump in. So they would be for sale. There's no map associated, no condo plan associated at this time, but they would 25% would need to be affordable, so that would be 2 of the 8 pursuant to code.
Thank you.
May I make a comment about that? In the EIR, it says there'll be rentals. So
Thank you.
yeah. I don't know if that's changed. No, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, so if they are rentals, we'll have the applicant clarify if they are rentals. There's different affordable requirements, but it's still 25%.
Mr. Willers?
Okay. let's see, where do I begin? I want to emphasize Commissioner DAMBACH's comments and questions that she had. I concur with all of them, actually. I think that the circulation plan and its evaluation for the project is lacking, and it needs to be more carefully studied for the reality of the project site. First Street West, I believe, is not an adequate street to handle the circulation of this property. It carries with it many constraints, and to rely heavily on it will further constrain what is already a secondary route off of Broadway when Broadway is impacted. First Street West often sees much of the overflow traffic from Broadway in a busy condition. And while there was traffic studies done on the First Street West corridor, those traffic studies essentially end at Andrew and don't take in much of anything to the south. What happens just even in the school scenario when pickup and drop-off occur in the morning and the evenings is that First Street West is actually the outlet street. No one drives on Broadway. Often they come down Napa Street to First Street West, or they come up First Street West off of Broadway after dropping their children off, head up First Street West to Napa and avoid Broadway altogether. So First Street West is a secondary major street, even though it's a minor street in the circulation plan of the city. The other issues that I'm going to address are primarily related to issues of the relationship between the EIR and the development code. There's a phrase that's often used throughout the EIR that says plan and code consistency is not itself an adverse physical impact on the environment. I have enough experience with plan and code consistency to understand, I think, what this means, but I'd like it explained so that people in the audience, in the public, would understand what that means. I believe that it means that the EIR is looking at environmental impact. It's not looking at the zoning code as its guiding document. But at the same time, it's where often the planning issues raise themselves in an EIR discussion, and yet, and they have context for each other. And in the context of this project, it raises itself again on page, 410-4, where language of the old ordinance gets mixed with the language of the new ordinance. And that ordinance being SMC 3/2023. The Planning Commission by SM 3/2023 can no longer waive a residential component except in very specific cases. So that language needs to be removed. It appears often in the EIR, and it's no longer a valid comment. Also, the residential component shall be equal to 100% of the commercial component, and this percentage cannot be reduced except in very limited cases as described in that ordinance. And in those exceptional cases, there is a residential component fee that must be paid. So, in my mind, there's an evaluation of projects often in the alternatives that come in conflict with our ordinances that may make them infeasible, basically, for approval. And I think an EIR needs to determine whether or not a project, at its very basic, could be approved, because if it is not approvable, it is essentially infeasible. And I believe that alternatives in the context of the EIR are to find a feasible project whose ultimate goal is to eliminate the impacts of the proposed project, is to evaluate the impacts of the proposed project, look at alternatives and how they might, at least if they can, work towards eliminating all of those impacts if it can as an alternative, trying to find the superior environmental project. So I'm assuming that the alternatives in the document, we can trust as a planning commission that those have been deemed feasible projects in the context of the EIR, meaning that they represent projects that could move forward in an approval environment. And then I'm going to begin, now I'm going to begin to speak directly to the specific alternatives and pose some questions that I have. If one of the primary purposes is exploring alternatives to reduce environmental impacts, I question in the alternative 2, where it's the 50-50 mix, why, which is one of the most significant impacts of the proposed project being the underground parking, in a project that has reduced the square footage by almost 42%, that the underground parking remains in that alternative. It appears to me that if you remove the underground parking as it is in the third alternative, the 75-25, many of the substantial environmental impacts go away. And it would bring it into equal, if not better, than alternative 3. You know, the logic is that in alternative 3, the logic is that the reduction of the square footage of the project in the 75-25 allows the parking to come to the surface. Well, if that's the case in alternative 3, then it's certainly the case in alternative 2. And then on page 15 or 5-17, I'm sorry, in the first paragraph, the alternative 2, this alternative represents a 42% less square feet of development. And my question is how can its impacts be similar to the proposed project in relationship to its utilities and services if it's almost half of the size of the proposed project? And then again, in relationship, in comparing alternative 2 in the utility and services, in alternative 3 on page 5-24 in the first paragraph, it basically makes a comment that a smaller amount of redevelopment, and I'm shrinking the overall sentence or phrase, would have a lesser impact. Well, if that's true for alternate 3, why is it not true for alternate 2, where alternate 2 is actually a smaller, a more robust lessening of impact by size of project? And then I think this is more, I'm going to have to look if this is the same one, 15-5-17. So in utilities and service systems, which is 517, there are 4 paragraphs actually, and those 4 paragraphs independently come to a reduction of at minimum 30% in each of the categories that the paragraphs analyze. Yet at the bottom, the result is alternative 2 would result in similar generation of solid waste and therefore it has similar level of impact as compared to the proposed project. Every category in the analysis above reduces the impact by at least 30%. How can it be similar? And then in going further in the alternatives, my feeling in general is that alternative 3 really did not receive a co-equal level of analysis as did alternative 2 as well as the proposed project. And I realize that you're not taking proposed projects to the level or taking alternatives to the level of the proposed project. But there were many comments in the analysis of alternative 2 that are essentially, well, there's less area, therefore there's less impact, and therefore it's a reduction in terms of the proposed project without any supporting analysis for that. Unlike in alternative 2, there's a lot of analysis, there's cited analysis, and very, in my review, little, and if not any, cited backing data for the conclusions that were reached. You know, some of it is intuitive, but at the same time, I think we as a commission in the future need to be able to rely on data that we can rely on to say that a project is superior and that it does meet their qualifications of CEQA to approve as a project in the future. And we're going to rely heavily on this document if we go forward in a project approval scenario. Alternative 4, much the same way, in my mind, the following alternatives, alternative 4, 3, 4, and 5, to me represent alternatives that are looking for a certain outcome, and they make generalities of those outcomes. And those generalities, other than referring to some data, don't really refer to data in respect to what I see as an analysis of the alternative. It comes to conclusions. Those conclusions are basically based on size of the project or assumed size of the project, and that size would result in a lesser impact. You know, the smaller hotel, in essence, or the hotel that has fewer rooms, in essence, kind of says it all, and that is that it's not a smaller project. It's equal in size. In fact, it's larger than the proposed project, and its use square footage, it's 1,000 square feet bigger than the proposed project. And yet, because it has fewer rooms, those fewer rooms are actually larger. They have a completely different use than the rooms in the proposed project. Those larger suites have a different occupancy and have a different type of user. None of that analysis has been done in terms of relationship to how that change in use for not making fewer rooms is not equating a smaller project in this regard. It might lower the parking count and it might lower the number of cars coming, but it does definitely change the dynamic of use on the property. And so, I find that these alternatives are lacking in their thoroughness, and I'd like to see that thoroughness fixed in the final, so that I have data that I can rely on when I'm going forward in an approval environment. Thank you.
Any other commissioners have comments? Okay, well, at this point, we'll go out to the public. If you want to make a comment, please, I don't know could I have a show of hands of how many people out there want to talk? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, there's only 6. You don't really have to queue up. Just kind of wander up when it looks like you got an opening. 3. Oh, yeah, and I will, we do have this 3-minute thing here, but because of the importance of this.
Could we waive the 3 minutes, because there's not many of us, and we don't have that much more to say.
Well, I was going to finish talking, hold it a second. I'll finish my sentence, which was, I won't hold you religiously to 3 minutes. I won't cut you off mid-sentence. I won't ask Matthew to open the trap door to drop you down to the basement. But I would encourage you to not go on and spend a lot more than a few minutes extra.
My husband doesn't.
Okay, so we're not going to be fanatical about this, but we do want to keep the comments.
Carol,
Go ahead.
Carol Campbell, 307 West Spain Street. I am also very concerned about the traffic and congestion on West Napa Street. The whole plaza has a problem with traffic and congestion, and our wonderful tourists who all take their time crossing whenever they feel like it, which you have to think about when you try to mitigate what you're going to do about pedestrians crossing there. I was hoping to have a slide that had been presented years ago about how the street was going to be changed to accommodate cars that come from Broadway to turn left to go west on West Napa, how they were going to turn into the hotel, because I have not gotten my hands on one of your large packs, so I don't know if it's in there. And I also am concerned about traffic coming out onto First Street West. You've got Bank of America traffic, you've got those little businesses there. I just don't know. If you are going to put in a left-hand turn lane, is that up to us to decide, or does Caltrans have to decide that and put it in? Because isn't that a county road on Napa? Would parking be lost on West Napa Street with all this traffic? Because we are really short on parking spaces here. We all know that. Locals know that very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just still smarting from years ago from Mayor Agramonte just turning this light on all the time. Sorry. Robert Demler, 649. I live on that minor street, but it's my street, and yours too. And I live between Napa and Andreu. I have a couple of things to say. And I've read the EIR, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I do feel sorry for the people who have paid for all these EIRs all these 7 or 8 years because they have not got their money's worth. It's sad because there are so many holes that you all have pointed out that really need to be filled for information. Anyway, what I want to say is there's a sewer issue on First Street West. I don't have data to show you. It's only anecdotal, but there's an issue there that has been ongoing. Secondly, I'm opposed to any residential aspect to this project. That neighborhood is congested. My neighborhood is congested. I think all of the developments within the historic district, certainly around the plaza and within a block, should be exempt from the housing requirement, particularly from the affordable housing requirement. Those units would not be conducive to raising a family because my neighborhood is not really a family neighborhood on First Street West. However, the real problem is parking. And the real problem of parking is employee parking. All around the plaza, but of course there's the little lady in the little car that goes around, but not on my street. And employees park there, and they park there all day long. I would much rather see no residential and more parking for the employees. It was a requirement. When Leslie and I sold our Adobe on West Spain, the Planning Commission required that they be parking for the employees. And I think you should require that there be parking for employees to get those employees off the street. And something's got to be done on a broader scope. It's not just a Hotel Sonoma issue for parking of employees. It's a greater issue. And those are my main concerns. I know other people have done more and better research than I on the ins and outs of the EIR, but there are some real gaps and holes in it that need to be filled. But I'm not really so much a big supporter of housing around the plaza. It's just too congested. Anyway, thank you for listening to me. I hope, three.
That was a few
sort of
seconds
three,
ago.
never
That's
mind.
okay. Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. My name's Carol Marcus, 873 First Street West. I will keep this to probably about 4 minutes by my typing. So, for as long as the EIRs for the proposed project have been under review, I have felt and continue to feel that the aggregation of 4 parcels into one amplify every environmental impact because it results in a project that is simply too large in the context of this historically significant area in Sonoma. The diagram I've handed out illustrates this. The proposed project would comprise roughly 1/4 the area of the Sonoma Plaza. This is, in case this is on TV, for our television audiences at home. There we go. Joining the parcels magnifies the impacts of scale, greenhouse gas emissions, energy and water use, waste management, traffic, and parking. Sonoma has not developed by aggregating lots together, particularly in the historic district, adjacent to the plaza, where the fine-grained development is what gives the Plaza District its unique character. According to the Subdivision Map Act, lot line adjustments must conform to the local general plan, any applicable specific plan, and zoning ordinances. Aggregating 4 lots conflicts with Sonoma's general plan and development code, which call for compatibility with existing lot patterns and scale of the community. Thus, I feel that the proposed project will have significant environmental impacts, and that the conclusions that the impacts are less than significant, particularly in the land use section of the RDEIR, which I'm going to refer to as the EIR, just for brevity, that those conclusions are flawed. Though the issues to be resolved in areas of controversy section of the EIR lists the items to be resolved, it lists the items to be resolved in the current draft. They have not been resolved. The project is still out of compliance with the general plan and development code. Traffic has not been studied on First Street West all the way to MacArthur Street. The loading dock on First Street West has not been addressed, and parking shortfalls have not been addressed satisfactorily. As an example, the residential and hotel uses would both occupy parking spaces overnight, and yet the shared use parking reduction model is being employed. There are 200 parking spaces required on the site, and only 130 are provided. Further, the Planning Commission can no longer grant a waiver to the housing requirement. Thus, the proposed project and all of the alternatives, aside from the no project alternative and alternative 2, the 50-50 hotel housing alternative, do not comply with Sonoma's development code and therefore have a significant environmental impact. The increased floor area ratio of 2 enjoyed by this parcel is granted because of the requirement that 50% of the floor area of the project be dedicated to housing. The fact that the EIR states that the impacts of being out of compliance with the general plan and development code are less than significant doesn't make it true. Perhaps the EIR comes to this conclusion because the environmental review process assumes that the Planning Commission will bring the project into compliance when it reviews the project. In this case, the responsibility of bringing the project into compliance with these documents rests with you. If the Planning Commission fails to bring the project into compliance with Sonoma's General Plan and Development Code, there will indeed be environmental impacts. The larger the site area, the larger the project. And the larger the project, the more environmental impacts it has. Both of the alternatives, which include housing, reduce the environmental impacts relative to the proposed project and are thus superior to it. Residential uses require less water, less parking, less energy use, less waste removal, fewer greenhouse gases being emitted, result in less traffic, and principally house people in the center of Sonoma. And as an aside, we raised a family right on the plaza, lived there for 10 years, and raised a family until our oldest, now almost 29, was 3.5 years old. And it was a wonderful place to raise a family. And it's housing people in the center of Sonoma, which is envisioned in our General Plan and Development Code. And the 50% housing alternative is the only one that complies with these documents. Thank you.
Vic and 40, 755 Broadway. Before I start, can I assume that the, maybe this is a question for staff here, can I assume that the 100% is the 100% area requirement is what's being used to define, or are we still on the 50%?
You're talking about the residential component?
Yeah, the residential.
We're going to clarify that with the city attorney and get back to everyone on that.
Okay. But for the discussion, shall I use 50%?
I would, the current code, the current code is 100% of the commercial area.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Well, I'll have to change keys. I guess I could do that. Let's see. So what I wanted to talk about was the narrative, I mean, the residential component, and just, I guess, tying it into the EIR probably isn't an issue any further, so I won't bother with that. The fact that the project narrative is based on erroneous interpretations of the size of the residential component pretty much makes all of the further comments about the percentages and the size and the square footage void, because the project narrative assumes that the required residential component is far smaller than the calculations that are done by the project narrative. Just as an example, there's a claim at one point that in the project narrative that the residential component that's proposed would be reducing or would be coming close to the required amount and only 4,600 square feet short of the required amount, but it's actually 22,000 short by using these erroneous assumptions. So I think the entire project narrative really needs to be, the parts on the residential component need to be reevaluated or redone, really, because they're so far off. And on the reduction or waiver, sounds like this may not be an issue if the process is changed to include or to conclude that the 50-50 version or 100%, whichever, the larger version of the residential component is required by the development code. The environmental impact report is going to be radically inadequate. Some of the issues, I guess, really are beyond the discussion when the EIR is that far off, I guess, in terms of the residential component. But the offsets that were suggested in the narrative about the Lynch building. Oh, by the way, I was the architect for the Lynch building, and I'm familiar with it. And I designed the small studio apartments as affordable by design. They're very small, 400 square foot, open area studios. And so changing those to an affordable quote is not going to have very much effect in terms of the providing more affordable housing. It's already affordable. And the in lieu fee is an available method, I guess, to deal with affordable housing or housing in general. But the cost, as you know, to build a unit is far more than the fee will be. And if I'm understanding this correctly, requiring the full-scale residential component may make some of this irrelevant. So, okay, great, thank you.
Okay. If I could just interrupt for a sec. Do you think, staff, do you think it would be helpful to clarify what the ordinance says about the 50% and the housing component fee? Because I think people may not be aware
I don't
of it.
think this is an appropriate time to do that.
Okay.
We'll wait for the city attorney to chime in.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Marty Bennett. I live at 19167 Unit A, Robinson Road. I'm with Unite Here Local 2, the Hotel Workers Union. I'm also an instructor emeritus of history at Santa Rosa Junior College and a 30-year resident of the city. Our union represents workers at 3 major hotels in the county. In addition, workers at the Fairmont Sonoma Mission Inn are now organizing to affiliate with Unite Here Local 2. Another sister local, Unite Here Local 49, represents gaming, food service, and hotel workers at the Grayton Casino. Several points I'd like to make about the recirculated draft DIR. The affordable housing crisis in the Sonoma Valley and across the county is near disaster. Raising the wage floor is essential to address housing affordability, particularly for low-income renters. Wages have dropped by 3% for the lowest 20% of wage earners in the county over the last 40 years. Moreover, median rents have climbed by 28% during the last 20 years, but renter incomes increased by just 10%. 77% of low-income households in Sonoma County are paying more than half of their income on housing costs, and many are on the edge of displacement to more affordable housing markets in Mendocino, Lake, Solano, Sacramento, and eastern Contra Costa counties. This project aligns with our vision for a more sustainable hotel development, particularly the 25% affordable units on site, which is a step in the right direction. We also applaud the mitigation measures proposed to address worker commute impacts, including free transit bus passes for workers who commute via transit. We also believe there's a path in place for making jobs created at this hotel good jobs that will enable workers to live in the community where they work and be less likely to commute from outside the valley and the county. Consequently, workers will be able to participate in their children's school activities, attend local congregations, and engage in the civic and cultural life of the community. So we urge you to approve the draft EIR, and we strongly support the project.
Hi, my name is Sonia Carabel, and I'm also with Unite Here Local 2, so I won't run through our whole list again. But, you know, we are the Hotel Workers Union in Sonoma County and across the Bay Area. And, you know, we really have a vision for lifting up standards in the hotel industry in Sonoma County. We believe that the status quo has not been working, and we want a vision of a sustainable hotel industry. You know, right now, as Marty pointed out, there's a real imbalance between what the housing is in Sonoma County and what the jobs are that are mostly available to people in the tourism industry, and you know, providing living wage jobs that actually allow people to live here. And we, you know, have a vision of a more sustainable industry where there are living wage jobs, where workers can afford to live in the area, where they don't have to commute from miles and miles away, and where they are able to be really like rooted in their community in that way. And you know, we believe that this hotel project does align with that vision. You know, again, the 25% affordable housing is you know, a move in the right direction. Obviously, we need as much affordable housing as we can get in the valley. And additionally, the transit passes are also an important aspect for workers who, you know, many times are, you know, if workers are able to live close by, they can also take transit more effectively. And we do believe that there's a pathway in place for these jobs to become good jobs. And, you know, when workers do have good living wage jobs, they are, again, able to be more woven in with the fabric of the community. And, you know, to be here, be part of the Sonoma Valley, be part of Sonoma, and be part of building that diversity. And that really makes this place beautiful. So that is why we are here to support this project and urge you to pass it. And, you know, we think that the EIR does include some really impactful mitigation measures that will be helpful for the workers at this hotel. So thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Fred Ollebuck. I live on 8th Street East. Marty was my professor at the JC and had some great classes with him, and so I would like to second Marty and Sonia's comments. From my experience watching projects in CEQA seems to me to be the time when people throw every bit of spaghetti they've got on the wall and see what will possibly stick. And so I think that we've already been through this a couple of times with CEQA, and so it's kind of surprising that we're seeing the same exact thing over again. I personally would support alternative 3 or 4, and I think the city's out of compliance with the sustainability paradigm and the triple bottom line, and the city doesn't have a full cost accounting for its tourism industry, which is really strong on the economy, and CEQA is really strong on the environment, but the city tourism policy and the city sustainable tourism page has got nothing about equity. And so to second Marty and Sonia's comments, to have a no card check agreement with Marty's union, I think is basically giving a green light to union organizing there, and to have people be able to earn a living wage and to live in Sonoma Valley, which would reduce greenhouse gas impacts a lot and would balance the triple bottom line and would make the city sustainable and in compliance with the sustainability problem, rather than have the equity pillar be so far short of where it should be. So I think that that's a really strong point of the project and those particular alternatives, and to bring the triple bottom line into balance by having those alternatives that are really strong on socioeconomic equity makes the city consistent with what the sustainability paradigm should be. And I guess that's about it. Thanks.
Anybody else out there want to make a comment? Just a minute, Mr. Demler. Matthew, do we have anybody online?
There are currently no members of the public on Zoom.
Okay. Mr. Demler, how about 1 minute? since you took 4 already.
It's a deal. Thank you. This is like being in the doctor's office and your mind just drains of your thoughts. Back to the housing and the parking and all of that. We're approaching this from the wrong end. We're talking about affordable housing, and it should be affordable wages. And I know our merchants are sacred here in Sonoma, but there should be some push for some minimum wage for our people that work here. And also, another observation, I am not sympathetic with people who have to drive 30 minutes. 2/3 of my career was overseas, and it was wonderful. 1/3 of my career was in San Francisco. I lived in Novato, and I lived in Walnut Creek, and it was often 2 hours each way. I'm not sympathetic about American Canyon or Santa Rosa or Petaluma. Anyway, we've got to deal with the other side of this issue as well. Thank you for indulging me.
Okay, thank you. Anybody change their mind, want to say something who hasn't previously commented? Ms. Patry? No? Okay. Well, that then concludes the public comment. Are there any commissioners that would like to add anything additional?
I'll make a comment, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank the public for coming out. I really appreciated your feedback in helping us make a more informed decision. And I also want to applaud the work of my fellow commissioners in their analysis of the impact report. I came prepared to make some very basic comments, fortunately very similar to what was communicated by my colleagues. I'm particularly concerned about the loading zone, the First Street West component. Has been concerning, but I really also was looking at this from a perspective of equity, and so I appreciate the comments from the public, and I will be looking very closely at some of the alternatives and some of the improvements to some of the alternatives per my colleagues' comments to those, and just want to express my appreciation for the work that's been done by the members of the public, and I look forward to further dialogue, so thank you.
Okay. Ms. O'Neill?
Thank you. It's great to see everybody here. Some really lovely familiar faces. Good to see everybody. One overarching comment, I feel like we get it backwards, and I know CEQA has this requirement here, but doing the EIR before we have any kind of approvable project, it just seems backwards, and I know CEQA doesn't require an EIR on a project that ultimately will not be approved. I don't know what we can do in the city of Sonoma, but that's something that we've been spending 11 years on this one, and I think for the developers' benefit as well as for all of ours, I want to see if we can't reverse that order somehow. One of the alternatives that I did not see that I was curious about was no restaurant, or having the restaurant across the street in the Bank and Marin site. So I was wondering if that would be a possibility. A comment on if there are residential units on the site, they will have to be rentals. As a mortgage banker, I can tell you they cannot be sold because you would not get any financing on it. So that would really limit who could buy it because of the need to not have your commercial space greater than 25% of the overall space. So that's something to just pay attention to. Workforce housing, we all want to see that included, but we're talking about 60 hotel employees. Even if we were going to be providing housing for 25% of them, we're still talking about significant workforce housing. I don't see that solution on site, not yet. I love Vic Conforti's work that he did in the Lynch building and the 7 studio units, and I would like to see us explore something more along the line of something creative and clever where they are affordable by design, maybe even something along the lines of dormitory housing for employees, but something that would allow more housing locally. I hate commuting. I lived overseas too, never commuted, don't want to see anybody else have to commute. And I'm also very concerned about the impacts for the loading zone. I think that's a really critical one. And I don't see that we quite have a solution there yet. And I also know how badly that went with the lodge. And I think we've got to be very diligent to make sure that we don't have a similar problem with the loading zone for this property. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Ms. Domba?
Just make one comment. I specifically did not delve deeply into the alternatives because of, was hoping to deal with those as part of the project. But I agree that it's hard to do that for if we were to change the project substantially, then the EIR becomes irrelevant. So I do appreciate that. But I will say one comment around affordable housing and workforce housing. It is a tangible way to offset VMT. It's probably the most tangible way for us to offset VMT because of all the issues that were raised today around the length of commuting that people, our workers, have to make. I don't think I mentioned it, but some people are super commuters, over 1.5 hours to come here to work. And the last comment I'll make is I would love to see a more proactive collaboration with the city, nonprofits, and developers to bring all affordable housing to this, or workforce housing to this particular project. I think it would set a great precedent. I know it's not part of the code, but I'll just put out there that part of our general plan is to be innovative. And so I would just throw the gauntlet down for us to do that as we move forward.
Anyone else? Okay, that concludes this item on the agenda. So we have issues update. Are there any issues we needed to be updated on?
No, I just wanted to just make final comments. That was on the screen just a second ago, is just to remember, if you did make comments tonight and you do have written comments, to send those in to Christina, and then we'll give those to the consultant in a nice, concise pile for their review. And there were some questions more oriented towards the project itself, and some questions around our code and how it applies to this project. And staff will be presenting that when we present the project itself, and if necessary, an attorney memo maybe in regards to some of those questions.
Do we have anything on issues update?
Nothing on issues.
Okay. And comments from the commission on anything further? No?
I'd like to welcome Jennifer Gates.
Yes, I will join you in that. She actually lives in town. How about that? Been a big thing for me to have people actually live here. So thank you all, and stay tuned for the next chapter. I need a motion to adjourn. A second.
Do you want to do a roll call?
Yeah.
All right. Commissioner Dombach?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Gorman Jenkins?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent?
Aye.
Commissioner Willers?
Yep.
And Vice Chair Barbos.
Yes.
Thank you.